Willkommen in einem anderen video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case part 25 of my organisational series of videos. In this video, I'll cover the structure and strengths of the formation of a number of WARPAC members during the 1980s. Or I should really say Warsaw Pact. I'm probably certain that the Soviet bloc never intended their alliance to be shortened to WARPAC, because that has kind of like negative connotations. Or then maybe they did, who knows. After creating a number of videos on various World War II armoured divisions and the formations of the PLA and ROCA, I realised that the format I used seemed to be moderately popular. I don't mean general layperson popularity, as few if any lay people would have any interest or understanding of battalion structures of a division or brigade. I mean people who have an interest in the subject, but not enough to drill down into the company structure. As a result, I decided to create a video on both NATO and WARPAC formations from the 1980s, specifically 1986. This, being my second video, covers the WARPAC countries. There are some people who have stated that if World War II began, it could have likely have occurred sometime between 1986 and 1988. And would basically be a last-gasp attempt by the Soviet Union to avert economic collapse by unifying the people in war and extracting wealth from Western Europe. This was based on an article written in the Soviet military journal Red Star back in the mid-1980s. The writer of the article saw the danger of the ALN 2000 asymmetrical warfare doctrine to the Soviet linear doctrine and suggested that if an attack was not carried out before the NATO doctrine was adopted, the Soviets would never have the opportunity to do so. This obviously represents an opinion by the hawks in the Soviet military. I personally feel that this was a very unlikely scenario, as the Soviet Union in this period was like an old man. Even if it wanted to conduct that strategy, it would have preferred a nap and a warm cup of cocoa. Now let's get on to the video. I'll be listing the main divisional formations of some of the WARPAC countries from the period down to battalion level. Using my trusty micro-armour rules point system, I will attempt to arrive at a strength for each formation. As with my other videos, I'll be using the point system from the old 1986 micro-armour rules Corps Commander. In future videos, I will provide a comparison of the strengths of the different opposing formations so you can see which was more powerful than the other. For those who have not seen my earlier videos before, first a quick key section. This shows an example of the point system. In this case, it covers a Russian first wave Russian tank division which was deployed in Europe in 1989. This shows the regiment or equivalent level of formation. The number of each regiment is indicated, as is its combat strength in points. This shows the battalion or equivalent level. Number of each battalion is indicated, in this case 3 tank battalions. Moving to the right, we come to the battalion combat strength, in this case 875, followed by battalion code and finally combat values, using a set of rules based on SPI Modern Battles board game. This value, or the board game value, will generally be ignored in this video as it's used for a set of figure gaming rules, but the other values will be used as they provide an idea of the battalion type and strength. In front of the battalion name is a mobility symbol, which could be motorised, horse, cycle, armoured, and so on. In this case, the mobility is ICV, or Infantry Combat Vehicle. For some of the battalions, an idea of the weapon within is provided. In this case, this is a battalion which consists of 122mm howitzers. Let us first start with the Russian formations. Most of the Russian formations that would have been involved in a potential war were deployed in East Germany. However, significant forces were available in the rear, such as countries like Poland, Hungary, and of course Russia itself. Before we move into the formations itself, a few notes about the way the Soviets grouped these formations. The Soviets had 3 levels of readiness: Razvoniete, or ready, or expand, filled up. A unit was considered ready if it could conduct combat operations with little or no mobilization required. Neu Razvoniete was basically not ready. The last level was Zapas, or reserve, which primarily means reserve or stock. I will leave it up to the viewer to interpret what that means, but the explanations in English seem reasonably clear. It should be noted that if the Soviets decided to prepare for any invasion, formations which were not ready would have been brought up to a state of readiness as quickly as possible and would be available to feed into the front line as reserves or a second attack wave very quickly. I'd presume at least the earliest a week was required, and for formations further away, several weeks, because it would take a little while to arrive. The reserves would likely take a lot longer to prepare. On the other hand, if the Soviets started preparing those divisions, NATO would be aware, which probably would not be a good thing for any Soviet invasion. The second classification that I'll be using is more of a NATO classification. The concept of first line or wave, second line or wave, or third line or wave. I'm uncertain if the Soviets ever grouped their divisions into such breakdowns, but these could correspond to equipment level. A first wave would be equipped with T-80s and T-72s, a second wave with T-64-62s, and a third wave T-55-54s. The same breakdown would exist for anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons. Presumably it would be possible for a first wave division equipped with T-72s to be either ready or non-ready, as it would be possible for the second wave division equipped with T-64-62s to also be ready or not ready. With a lack of hard data, a lot of these classifications will need to be guesswork. Thus, my divisional structure is based on whether I feel the division is what NATO would call first wave, second wave, or third wave. The ready or not ready classification is more related to mobilisation time and not directly related to equipment. But we could assume most first wave would be ready and most second wave would be not ready, with all third wave being reserved. Viewers are free to interpret this in any way they wish, as I certainly do not pretend to be the source of the perfect truth, and quite frankly, when I started looking at the inventory breakdowns of some of what I consider were third waves, I saw comparatively modern equipment as well. So this is a very, very vague breakdown. Let's start with the first wave divisions, one equipped with T-80s and one equipped with T-72s. As these divisions were based in East Germany, they were probably both ready status. The period around 1986 was a transitional period for the Soviets as well as NATO, although with the Soviets it's purely related to new weapons being delivered. The main one being the T-80, although new versions of the BMP and BTR were also being delivered. I'm uncertain which formations received these new weapons first, but it's likely the 1st Guards or 11th Guards Tanks Division would have been one of the first divisions to receive the new main battle tank. I'm uncertain if the entire division was equipped with these new vehicles or if it was based by regiment, but in this case I'm assuming the entire division received the new T-80 main battle tank by around about 1986 or 1988 at least. This makes the division the closest to a new NATO division receiving the M1 main battle tank. When we look at the equipment manifest for 1985, we see that this division has 288 T-80s and 31 T-62s, so I think my assumption is reasonably correct. The division itself contained an impressive list of assets: air defence, recon, engineer, SSM, maintenance and helicopter formations. While the list was long, the strengths of each of these formations were not particularly impressive, with the exception of the reconnaissance battalion. The artillery regiment consisted of two 122mm self-propelled howitzer battalions, a 152mm self-propelled howitzer battalion, and a 122mm MRL, or rocket battalion. It provided a respectable amount of indirect fire support, but not, by NATO standards, large or powerful. The BMP motor rifle regiments were reasonably strong, equivalent to smaller NATO brigades. The BMP motor battalions and T-80 tank battalions complement each other rather well, and each provide the Soviet with a battalion-level formation which could match a smaller NATO battalion. Of course, where the Soviet division makes up for this lack in strength at this level is the sheer number of regiments, 4 in all. The tank regiment, while slightly weaker, was nonetheless a powerful formation. The tank battalion was unusually weak due to the small size of Soviet companies, but the BMP motor rifle battalion provided a significant, powerful offensive force nonetheless. The T-80 equipped tank divisions provided the Soviets with a very powerful formation. However, in 1986, most of the first wave tank divisions would have still been equipped with the T-72, which was still a reasonably good main battle tank, but not as powerful as T-80, at least in theory. Let's look at a more typical first wave tank division, in this case the 16th Guards Tank Division. The equipment manifest in 1980 and 1991 shows 261 T-80Bs. So in reality, this division was re-equipping rapidly with T-80s, but possibly in 1986, the T-72 was still the main battle tank. The divisional structure obviously remained the same, except in this case the division was equipped with T-72 main battle tanks and a number of other older weapon systems, such as the towed 120mm mortar. It's unlikely the division would have had an attached helicopter squadron, but I've included it nonetheless, as this was in the most powerful Soviet group, which would have been the spearhead of any invasion. The divisional assets were the same as the previous division, except for the 16th Guards Tank Division. There was no SSM, or Surface-to-Surface Missile Battalion. I'm uncertain why this was the case, but it does indicate there was possibly more variability in the Soviet structure than most NATO manuals indicate. The artillery regiment was identical, both in equipment, structure and combat strength. As expected, the BMP motor rifle regiments are weaker due to the older equipment, particularly the T-72 main battle tank, but it wasn't significantly weaker, perhaps only 4% weaker, so it didn't represent a major downgrade in power. When we look at the tank regiments, the drop in combat strength was more significant, perhaps dropping as much as 6% in terms of combat capacity, at least based on this points system. While I'm not 100% certain, it's likely the 3rd Guards Tank Division was equipped with T-62s, as it was deployed in Belarus and part of the 7th Tank Army. It was likely a second wave division, which would have taken several days to mobilise and made up the second wave of any Soviet forces. When we actually look at the equipment manifest in 1985, the division does show 322 T-72s rather than T-64s. So this is a hypothetical division, but its objective is to show you what a possible second wave T-64 equipped division or tank division would look like. When we look at the 3rd Guards Tank Division in more detail, a formation which was likely what NATO would describe as second wave, would take some time to get ready. It was fully manned in theory and contained weapons which could hold their own on the modern battlefield, but would probably take a week or two in order to get combat ready and be sent into the front line. The reason why I thought this was second wave was that the divisional support was significantly lesser. There's obviously no helicopter squadron, and it had a much smaller reconnaissance battalion. The artillery still packed as much punch as a first wave, but a lot of the artillery, in fact all the howitzer artillery was towed, so it did lack the same level of mobility when compared with the full self-propelled artillery battalions. If this regiment or division was equipped with T-64s, the BMP motor rifle regiments would have been weaker than the first wave division, but the drop was only in the order of about 5%. It's also possible this was not equipped with infantry combat vehicles and may have used armoured personnel carriers such as the BTR-50. Once again, assuming it was equipped with T-64s, which I know it wasn't, the tank regiments were also weaker, but once again, not as much as I would have expected. Once again, it's also possible it was not equipped with modern ICVs and may have used armoured personnel carriers such as the BTR-50. One thing I am pretty certain, because it's non-ready and deployed well back into Belarus, I would expect that the training and quality level would have been less than a first wave. Also in the Belarusian military districts, the 76th Tank Division was likely a third wave division, as most of its formations were not manned. It would have taken several weeks to fully mobilise using the equipment stored at its location. The troops would have been local. It's likely this was armed with older equipment as well, such as the T-54 main battle tank and older armoured personnel carriers or even trucks. The actual equipment manifest in 1990 does show 314 T-62s, but it's also quite possible back in 1986 they were simply T-55s, 54s. One thing that I noticed when I started looking at the equipment manifest was that the tank divisions definitely got better tanks than the motor rifle divisions. So it's equally possible that most of the tank divisions actually had reasonably good tanks, irrespective of the wave. It was only the quality of the troops that really differed. The 76th Tank Division was little more than a base with equipment dumps and a skeleton cadre of officers, but given time it would have been able to be fleshed out with reservists and sent to the front line. Its biggest weakness was, well, in theory, the use of some older equipment, but also lack of quality and training by its troops. The actual divisional support formations were much the same as the second wave military formations and basically a similar strength, which wasn't particularly great. The artillery, in theory at least, was similar to the second wave division. However, it must be noted training and troop quality would have been much lower. The motor rifle regiment was significantly weaker, with much less heavier equipment and vehicles than even the second wave division. They would have been reasonable for defensive purposes, but probably not so great for attacking purposes. Once again, this assumes that it does use this older equipment. It's also possible the tank divisions did really get the best stuff up front at all times. The tank regiments were more respectful, but were definitely on the weak side. However, as with the other regiments, there was a lot of battalions. The self-propelled howitzers may have been towed, and the infantry combat vehicles may have been armoured personnel carriers, such as the BTR-50, for example. Let's now look at the first wave motor rifle divisions. The first will be the 20th Guards Motor Rifle Division, which contained tank regiments equipped with T-80 main battle tanks and BTR-80 APCs. While it's unlikely the rest of the division was equipped with the same main battle tank, I'll assume that is the case here, as it's possible and gives us a maximum strength division. The chart on the left from Wiki claims the structure of the division this is the structure of the division in 1988, which is not really quite correct. In 1988, the 1st Guards Tank Regiment was still with the division, with its replacement by the 9th Tank Regiment actually occurring in the following year, 1989. There was also a 4th Motor Rifle Regiment in the division, the 576th Bobruski Order of Lenin Red Banner Order of the Suraptov Motor Rifle Regiment. This was BTR Regiment. I suspect this was probably a temporary attachment, and as such I'll ignore it. On the right of the chart, this shows the 21st Motor Rifle Division. The 21st Motor Rifle Division was more likely equipped with older equipment, such as the T-72 and BTR-70 APCs throughout, thus represents a more average first wave division in 1986. The 20th Guards Motor Rifle Division shown here is equipped with the T-80 main battle tanks and a number of the most modern equipment. I'm uncertain if the entire division possessed the latest weapons available, and in 1986 it's unlikely. When we actually look at the equipment manifest in 1985, the division contained 231 T-62s and only 40 T-80 main battle tanks. Like the tank division, the divisional assets of the motorised rifle division is impressive, but with the exception of the independent tank battalion, which is present in this division and not in the tank division, the other assets aren't particularly powerful in terms of combat strength. There is anti-aircraft, reconnaissance, anti-tank, tank, engineer, SSM, maintenance, and an attached helicopter squadron would typically be found under divisional command. The main difference that you can see here from the tank division was the addition of the anti-tank and tank battalion. The artillery regiment is similar to that in the tank division, respectively powerful and self-propelled, but compared to NATO, not particularly overwhelming. The BMP motor rifle regiment is similar to that in the tank division, a reasonably well-balanced and powerful formation. The BTR motor rifle regiments used the Wheel, a BTR armoured personnel carrier, and while a reasonable vehicle, it was not an infantry combat vehicle to be exact, and it also lacked the same level of mobility as the BMPs. As a result, the strength of this battalion is lower than, let's say, a BMP motor rifle regiment, but is nonetheless respectively powerful. The tank regiment is similar to that in the tank divisions, and by using the T-80 main battle tank, a reasonably powerful formation. Let's now look at a more typical first wave motor rifle division, the 21st Guards Motor Rifle Division, which contained a tank regiment equipped with T-72 main battle tanks and BTR-70 APCs. This is probably a more typical first wave division in 1986. When we look at the equipment manifest for 1985, it shows 226 T-64As, 43 T-64B main battle tanks. So once I look at this in more detail, I feel that the older tanks ended up in the motor rifle division, but nonetheless, let's see what this division would look like in terms of combat strength if equipped with T-72 main battle tanks. This shows the 21st Guards Motor Rifle Division, and its structure is pretty much the same as the previous Guards Motor Rifle Division that we've covered. When we look at the army troops or divisional support formations, it's pretty similar, except we do not see a helicopter squadron, as this probably would not warrant it, but otherwise everything else is much the same. When we look at the Guards artillery regiments, we see no major change. When we look at the BMP motor rifle regiment, there is only a comparatively small drop in combat power if we assume that it's equipped with T-72s. But otherwise, it's pretty similar to the previous motor rifle regiment that we've covered in the previous division. When we look at the BTR motor rifle regiment, the combat strength does get affected significantly by the use of T-72s and BTR-70 APCs, as you can see by the reduction in its combat strength or points value. And finally, when we actually get to the tank regiments, we do see a reduction in combat strength by the use of the T-72, but in this case, not overwhelming. Let's now look at a second wave motor rifle division. These would have been equipped with T-64 main battle tanks and were most likely considered as not ready. The 50th Guards Motor Rifle Division was likely a second wave division, as it was once again located in my favourite military district, the Belarusian military district, and was part of the 28th Army. In the event of war, it would have been quickly brought up to a ready state and sent in as a second wave of forces. The equipment manifest here shows 214 T-64 main battle tanks. The basic structure of the second wave division is similar to that of the first wave, as it was intended to be used as reinforcements for any offensive. However, the old equipment and lower quality troops would have made it less effective than a first wave division. When we look at the divisional assets, unlike the first wave division, the anti-aircraft battalion was equipped with a towed 57mm anti-aircraft gun. The reconnaissance battalion consisted of AVRs such as the BRDM-2 and was significantly weaker. Other than that, the divisional assets were similar to that of a first wave division. Obviously, there is no attached helicopter squadron. The artillery in this division was primarily armed with towed howitzers rather than the self-propelled howitzers. This would have given it the same punch, but with lesser mobility. This division, assuming it's second wave division, did not have any BMP regiments. Instead, they were all BTR regiments. In addition, these lacked any armour or self-propelled howitzers within the formations, and as a result were significantly weaker. The tank regiments armed with the T-64 was also significantly weaker than the T-72 variety, but nonetheless respectful. Now we come to the final wave, the third wave, or reserve or mobilised divisions, such as the 149th Motor Rifle Division. I'm assuming if war should occur, these divisions would become manned using older equipment stored at the main location of the division. These would have taken a while to mobilise, get ready and sent to the front line. The equipment manifest for 1985 shows 214 T-55-54 main battle tanks. Several of these divisions in the Moscow military district were only partially mobilised, with many formations being totally unmanned. There was only a total of about 1,100 men in this division in 1988. These may have been the true third wave division NATO often refers to. Examples are the 32nd Guards Motor Rifle Division, which had many supporting formations completely unmanned. Irrespective, the final wave of Soviet divisions would have used the older T-54 main battle tanks, BTR-50 APCs, and obviously towed artillery. When we look at the divisional assets, the third wave division lacked a tank battalion, but was otherwise in principle the same as a second wave division. The artillery regiment was, once again in principle, the same as the second wave division. In most cases, the third wave division, or reserve division, lacked any manpower in their artillery formation, so it's possible many of these divisions would have gone to the front line lacking most of their artillery, and instead having corps level or army level artillery attached to them. The rifle regiment was very basic. Men in armoured trucks, or if they were lucky, older armoured personnel carriers, or if they were very unlucky, unarmoured trucks. The tank regiment was, in this case, equipped with T-54 main battle tanks and actually was sort of moderately manned at the time. The combat strength of this particular regiment was significantly less than second or first wave regiments, but nonetheless, once manned up and if given enough time to be trained, it would still have some level of effectiveness. Let's now look at the other WARPAC countries. All the WARPAC countries used the Soviet structure, typically the second wave divisional structure. There were some minor equipment differences between the nations, with East Germany using ZSU 57/2s in their AA companies instead of the 57mm towed AA guns. East Germans by 1990 also equipped their tank divisions with T-72s, with the motor rifle divisions containing T-55s. This was unusual for WARPAC countries. We'll first look at the first motor rifle division, which was similar to a second wave Soviet division. The equipment manifest for 1990 shows that there were 214 T-55 main battle tanks, so this was the main battle tank that was mainly used in this particular division. There were also 208 BTR-60s. The divisional support was similar to a second wave division, except the Germans used air defence missiles instead of anti-aircraft guns. The artillery was all towed and was identical to a standard Soviet second wave division. The motor rifle regiments were equipped with the BTR-60s and some BTR-70s, and was otherwise resembled a second wave Soviet division. The tank regiments all used T-55 main battle tanks, and as a result were significantly weaker than a T-64 or T-72 armed tank regiment. Let's now go to the tank division, or Panzer division. The East German 9th Panzer division followed the second wave structure. However, it was equipped with modern T-72s, making it a very powerful WARPAC tank division. The equipment manifest for 1990 shows 322 T-72 main battle tanks and 111 BMP-1, 30 BMT-2 ICVs. Let's now move over to Poland. As with the East German example, the Polish divisions used a typical second wave divisional structure. There were some minor differences between the nations, with Poland using OT-64As instead of BTR-60s, OT-62 also instead of BTR-50s or even BMPs. D-44 85mm guns instead of the T-12 100mm anti-tank guns, and FUGs replacing the BRDM-2, all comparatively minor changes. The Polish mechanised divisions, which is what they call these divisions, followed, as we indicated, the second wave structure, with the T-55 being the primary main battle tank. The equipment manifest here shows 16 T-34s, which surprised me, and 201 T-54/55s. I'm not going to do a detailed breakdown of all these divisions, otherwise this video would get too long, so let's just whip over to the Polish 5th Tank Division. This also followed the second wave structure, and in this case the main battle tank still being the T-55/54. The equipment manifest in 1985 shows 285 T-54/55s and 130 BMP-1s. Let's whip over to Czechoslovakia, once again also using a typical second wave structure. The minor differences between this nation and the Soviets were the Czechoslovakians used OT-64s instead of BTR-60s, also OT-62s instead of BTR-50s or BMPs, and OT-65s instead of the BRDM-2s. The regimental AA guns used the M53/50 AA guns. The divisional AAs used twin-towed 30mm anti-aircraft guns instead of the towed 57mm single-barrel AA guns the Soviets normally used. This shows the Czechoslovakian motorised rifle division, in this case the second, and as you can see it followed the second wave structure, with the T-55 being the primary main battle tank. The equipment manifest in 1985 shows 214 T-54/55s. The Czechoslovakian 1st Tank Division also followed the second wave structure, with the main battle tank being the T-72, but also containing a number of T-54/55s. The equipment manifest in 1985 shows 124 T-54/55s and 322 T-72s. This made this division pretty powerful. Let's now move over to Hungary. Once again, another second wave divisional structure country. There were some minor differences as indicated, and the differences here is the Hungary used the PSVH-4 instead of the BTR-60, the D-44 85mm anti-tank gun instead of the D-12 100mm anti-tank gun, and FUGs were replacing the BRDM2s. To keep this video short, I'll only show an average Hungarian motorised division, although it's likely the main battle tank was still the T-55. When we look at the 4th Mechanised Division, the equipment manifest for 1985 shows 188 T-54-55s. As this video is getting rather long, I'll not include the other WARPAC countries. Viewers can get a full detail on all divisions if you go to the Soviet Armed Forces 1945-1991 Organisational and Order of Battle site. The URL will be found at the end of the video or in the notes. I was also originally intending to provide a comparison between the various formations, but this video is already long enough, and I'll do that in my final series of comparison videos on the NATO and WARPAC formations. And so we come to another end of my video, in this case part 25 of my organisational video series, in this case looking at the WARPAC military formations in the 1980s, specifically 1986. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.